Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second Love the Lake program since COVID. Yay, we're all pulling out of it, right? Thank you for all of those who are joining us online as well. We're really excited to have Matthew Bode with us tonight. He's an exceptional photographer. Many of these folks are familiar with Bridget Butler. And we talked about last week that Bridget highly recommended Matthew. So let me give you a little background on Matthew. He's been a lifelong lover of wildlife. And since watching National Geographic and searching for lions and tigers and bears in his backyard as a youngster, he's never grown out of being that boy. Matthew discovered bird watching with his grandpa as a kid and picked it up again as an adult. After his wife bought him his first camera, he started using photography to identify birds and document the experience. More recently, photography has become his focus while still enjoying the experience of spending time with wildlife. And he just had a new baby about 8 weeks ago. So anything you say is fine tonight, Matthew. So congratulations.
What was it, a girl or a boy?
A little boy.
A boy, okay.
Yeah, you live here?
I live in St. Albans.
Oh, so
Great.
So I'm not originally from St. Albans. And I was talking to a guy one time in St. Albans and he said, where are you from? And I told him, I told him from down south. He said, I'm from down south. I actually was born in Fairfax. I said, I'm talking about a little bit further than that. So my name is Matthew. I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk. I really kind of have a passion, you guys may know, for birds in general, wildlife, and especially photography in the last few years. So what I'm going to show you tonight, want to kind of walk through, talk a little bit about my background, how I got to where I am in this kind of evolution of my birding experience. Talk more about fieldcraft and how I do what I do, because that's changed a lot in the last 3 years. Bird behavior I've been able to really come up close with, which is something very different to me than when I was using binoculars and kind of going through as more of a traditional lister. Talk some about the environments and especially stuff around here. And then final piece is just something that I personally have kind of embarked on more, which is capturing it as more of a fine art as opposed to just documentary, which is where I started. And I think it's where a lot of people start. So she mentioned already, started as a kid, grew up in Texas, not a lot in my backyard at that point in time. I loved animals, but all I could find were birds. And that's kind of what kicked it off. I was like, if that's what I have, then that's what I'm going to do. And started watching it. On and off bird up until about 2016, had a lull in work and decided to get out there back again, started taking binoculars. I was traveling all the time. So I ended up taking binoculars with me on trips, and I was kind of traveling around the US. And I was encountering a lot of places and a lot of birds that I didn't recognize. And I was only there for maybe a few days. And it's really hard to do really good birding and really get to terms with something. And my experience at that point in time was more in how fast can I see as many different species as I can get to. And one way to do that, besides just looking through a pair of binoculars and identifying the obvious ones, is then to take a bunch of pictures, take them back home, and then blow them up and try and figure out what's that little speck, that little duck across the lake that I saw. And like, is this or is this that? And trying to figure it out. So yeah, I got my camera. 2018, I looked at my wife, I said, you know what you just did, right? You're not going to see me for a while. And sure enough, I ended up getting pretty serious about it. So I'm going to really steer as clear as I can about talking really nerdy stuff, but I will absolutely answer the questions. I don't want to bore anybody. I shoot with a D500. It's a Nikon. I started with the D5500. That's what she gave me. I upgraded a couple of years ago to the D500, which is it's on a crop sensor. It's not a full frame, and it shoots really fast. The D500 combined with the lens I have, which is a 200 to 500 from Nikon, is an outstanding amateur setup for bird photography. It shoots fast. You have a range of focus. 500 is pretty good length for it, so that served me pretty well. So this is what I call a strike bird. I think that's a term, maybe a strike bird. It's what got your interest, what struck your interest in birding. And that's the bird I saw when I was a kid with my grandpa. I was out in the eastern part of Texas, and this magnificent thing, you guys have seen them, right? Huge birds, brilliant.
What are those birds called?
Pileated woodpecker.
I thought they were
Pileated woodpecker.
yeah. Affiliated, yeah.
And so that's what really got me interested initially. I shoot all kinds of birds. each species, each kind of season has its own way, and there's something unique about experiencing that through the lens. I venture to say shorebird photography is probably my favorite. I think it's easier to get more intimate experiences with shorebirds than any other bird regularly, reliably. And I remember this is actually down at Delta, and I'm gonna tell you 90+% of what I'm gonna show tonight was taken on Lake Champlain somewhere. I live in St. Albans. I try to shoot a lot in Franklin County now. I shoot Chittenden a lot. Delta Park's a good place. A couple others around there for birds, but up and down the lake. And I remember there's a time that I was out there on this is out on the mud flats, if you've ever been. In the fall, especially some years, the water gets so low you can walk out there without getting wet. And this is from, I think, 3 years ago, and it was a really low year. And this is a black-bellied plover. And I got this in Vermont, absolutely. And so I'm out there looking at this thing, and I don't know what made me do it, but I actually got down on the ground as opposed to standing up to shoot it. And something just like clicked, and I was like, this is really cool. But I didn't like this image. It's kind of fuzzy and it's far away. And so then I got really interested in getting good at this. I said, hey, how do I actually get good at photography? Up until that point in time, I was most interested in the birding side. And now I was interested in the bird photography aspect of it. So I started reaching out to some other people, got a hold of a few other photographers in the area, many of the people that you're probably going to recognize their names if you follow any of that on social media or anything like that, some of the eBird lists, and started working towards getting closer to birds. This is the lesser yellowlegs. Most shots that I take, you're going to see are edited and they're cropped to some degree, but I'll tell you in the last year or two, I've gotten really better about not cropping. So if you see an image, I'm probably not cropping, I'm probably getting this close to the bird and getting closer and closer to the point that you can even see like it fades. I didn't edit the blur images. That's just the way the camera is. I'm trying to get the eye in focus. And I spent maybe an hour with two Dunlin that were in breeding plumage. And they're so comfortable if you stay low, you don't disturb them. They stop seeing you as a potential threat. I mean, they're not going to be silly about it, but they're willing to walk around. My camera has a my lens has a focal range of 7 feet or greater. And there are absolutely times laying on the ground where the birds get closer than 7 feet to me, and I can't take a picture anymore. At which point you just, I've tried, I can't get it out fast enough.
Do you see as many birds in Vermont as you? It seems like it's more down south in other states.
So I do think Vermont is one of the harder places I've personally been to find a lot of wildlife, and it doesn't stop at birds. But that's not to say you can't find them.
Right.
It takes a little bit of work. If you've ever been to Florida, for example, finding shorebirds in Florida, you trip over them. I mean, you got to watch out for these guys, right? Versus here, you got to really work. So then I got really into trying to get closer to things. And I thought it was really cool because you start to notice some things like details about images that you can't see through binoculars from a distance. And if you can, it's hard to really pick up and see some things. You can see their feet. This is a semi-palmated plover. And semi-palmated in the front, they've got 3 toes. And the palmated part is they've got webbing that kind of goes in between. Yeah. And one of the very few ways you can distinguish this from a common plover, which are in Europe, but once in a while will come up here. And we had one, I think 3 years ago, like Jacob Crawford found one up in the north end of the lake. They don't have that. And so I think they've got it between one, but not the second. And this is blowing up and it's a little grainy, but it's starting to get to the point where I'm starting to notice things about birds that I wasn't noticing before. When I'm blowing through and trying to figure out as many species as I can, I wasn't appreciating the one that was in front of me. And I think what's changed a lot about my birding since getting behind a camera and getting better at spending time with birds is that I'm not in a hurry to go to the next one. In fact, it's kind of an old adage that you never leave the bird in front of you if you have a lens. If you have one that's cooperative, that's being intimate, and you're having a good moment with it, don't walk away from that because grass is not greener on the other side. This is a white-rumped sandpiper. This is taken, I'm talking mostly about migration, and most of this is going to be fall. This was actually spring migration, I think, last year. So this is in May last year, up at Campbell's Bay, if you guys are familiar, watching it up there. So one of the things, Campbell's, it's the north end of like Charcoal Creek, where it dumps into Lake Champlain. So all
Where are you? What town?
West Swan, yeah, I think West Swan. It's way up there. It's like as far north as you can basically get on
Yeah,
that
when you
side.
said the mud flats, I was thinking Swanton, because that's, I know 3 years ago, it was really dry.
Yeah.
And I didn't walk out there.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a few good places to do that. One of the things that then I started working on, and I've worked on a few different things and kind of use a conscious decision, is you start shooting like this, and a lot of bird photography, a lot of shorebird photography is in mud. We don't have beaches, we don't have a lot of sand like you're gonna see sanderlings running around like down south in Florida, right? We have mud, and that's what they come for, the mud flats. And that's cool to be able to go see them, but it's not a whole lot of color. It's a lot of browns. And so trying to find situations where they're in a different color and trying to capture that. So this was really hard. I had to wait for a while. He's foraging through the grass. And this is back in May. Things are still vibrant and green. And I just sit there and wait. And it's really hard because you got grass between you and the bird. You're trying to find a window and wait for the precise moment to take the photograph that you're trying to get a look at that. But that's really cool. And one way, just ID note here, bicolor bill is one way to identify the white rump sandpiper.
Are you
Sorry, which
sitting or squatting?
White rump.
or-
White rump sandpiper.
White rump sandpiper. I am almost always on my belly. So I'm on the ground. Oh, yes.
Do you wear a wetsuit?
I have a dry suit. And I bought the dry suit actually not for shorebird photography, but for ducks, because in the winter I will go out in the water when it's 33 degrees. I will floating hide. And yeah, that's a whole nother endeavor. But typically I'm on the ground. I've got the camera usually on the ground. The lens is usually sitting in the mud, or if it's water, I'm holding it as close as I can possibly get.
So you don't use a tripod? Letting the
I,
camera be in the mud?
yeah. It survived. The lens, I usually keep the lens just about like an inch, maybe off, and try to keep it level. So the purpose of all that is, I think, and images look better when you're eye level. And I'm doing that for shorebirds, but you know, when you talk about birds that are sitting up in a tree, it's actually better to try to find a place to get up higher to get them eye level, because eye level creates some intimacy when you're looking at a photo as opposed to looking up or looking down. I mean, you can shoot up at an owl, you can shoot down on a duck, but it looks different when it's eye level. It's right there with you. Here's another one of same area, but I went out and shot sunset. And when I shoot sunset, when I'm having a pretty good day for sunset, I'll probably go out there an hour and a half before, use the first 30-45 minutes to scout, figure out what kind of birds are out there, what they're doing, get comfortable with them, make sure they're comfortable with me. So that if I'm gonna shoot something sunset, I'm not walking out there at sunset for the shot. It's not gonna work. It rarely works like that.
Wait, what kind of bird is that?
I actually think that is the Dunlin again. Forgive me.
Pardon?
Yeah, I think that's the Dunlin again.
Oh, what?
Dunlin. It's same as this bird. That back. You see the back
The back
plumage?
is
Yeah.
over
Same one. They've got a black belly in the breeding season, and then when you get into the fall, when they come back, because they come late. They usually come like October. I think more into September, October, versus some of the other ones come earlier. They're very gray. They're very pale looking. What's very unique about them is their bill, and I have some more shots in here later that are better shots of them.
Oh, we see that.
So this is, I think this is a few minutes after sunset, so the color's kind of gone. It starts to get pale. I used to not know how to shoot, so something I worked on is getting better at shooting those pale colors. We get like just little bits of pinks and purples in the sky. And same thing, being out there, I shot all the way through sunset and stayed out there because the birds will still feed. And then one other thing I'll note is just my personal preference. A lot of photographers do different things. I don't use Photoshop. I do edit photos. I'm not saying I don't edit, but what's neat, I think unique about that, I don't remove anything from the object. If you see it clean, this is how clean it was when I shot it. And that's hard to do because you're gonna find, especially in Vermont, like when you're in the water, there's mud, there's sticks, there's all kinds of stuff. There's droppings from other animals out there crawling through. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. So trying to get an image that's a really clean shot is hard to do.
So you don't just.
You clean the area.
The highlights, you know.
I do edit things like that. In fact, I shoot intentionally based on how I think I'm going to edit them. I'm sorry, you were asking?
Oh, I just said, did you clean the area sometimes before the birds come? How about changing the exposure? Do you use Photoshop even for that?
I use Lightroom and I do change the
do something
exposure
for
settings.
exposure.
And I'll talk in a minute. I'll show you some examples of some extreme examples of how I shoot to get some things. Another way, and this isn't super crisp, it's not as crisp as some of the other things that I shoot. The other thing that I started to work on is not always getting so close, but also trying to get the feel of the vibe of an area. And so this is one where they call them, I'm at Delta Park. What you're looking at are the mountains on the New York side, okay? There wasn't a ripple in the water from here to there. It was the most still I've probably ever seen it.
What kind of bird is that?
That's an egret.
Oh, it's an egret?
Yeah. And so I saw him out there in the middle of the lake. He's probably a third of the way out there, so, and was just able to capture that. And another example, trying to step back and kind of experience it. Not exactly a shorebird, but it's a northern harrier. It's a female, and she's just she's out there coasting
It's a
on the
northern what?
harrier. Yeah, they're hawks, low
they're
flying
hawks.
hawks,
They're all
sometimes called
hawks.
swamp hawks.
Okay, there's a kestrel, but that's not that, right?
Not a kestrel, no. I don't know that I can actually say I've seen a kestrel on the mud flats.
Was that last bird?
Ooh, good question. I don't know.
Like they say.
Like that, yeah, they're not. Yeah,
I didn't know. this
somebody knows
was-
better than I do. That's not a bird I've been 7 feet away from. Here's one of the sanderling. Another thing I'm trying to incorporate is like instead of just shooting across at a mud flat or a beach, is actually shooting down and trying to incorporate some of the depth perspective here. Here's another example when walking along. This is a least sandpiper, kind of caught him mid-stripe with his feet up. And this is also in the springtime actually. And things are starting, you see some of the green starting to pop up. So here's, I don't have the original. This is edited. It's probably the only photo I'm going to show that's a vertical and a crop instead of everything else. This, when I shot it, was essentially black. Just the way I've kind of learned to shoot is when you shoot something that's really bright, and I'm trying to catch the sunset. If you adjust for the bird, it will blow out your image and you'll lose all the detail. So rather, I know that I need to protect the image, so I shoot for the sun, knowing what I have in the bird. The dynamic range on these cameras, if you keep your ISO, I'm talking technical for a second, if you keep your ISO low, you can actually pull a lot of detail. There is, I'm absolutely telling you, there's editing in here, but I had to learn for a couple of years to get to a point that I could shoot this way and still edit to this point. So this, I was really pleased with this. I went out for an hour and a half and watched the same bird. I actually went out there not knowing there's ruddy turnstone. It's a ruddy turnstone.
Oh, it's.
We get them. There's a handful that come through every year. Every year we have them, but there's not a ton of them. So I went out there initially thinking I was going to see like semi-palmated sandpipers and leaf sandpipers. There's just a ton of, and just ended up having this one come in. So I stayed there for about an hour and a half before I got to the sunset and watched it. What I wanted to do, what I still want to do, is to put that bird's head inside the sun. But, and you see these shots on beaches.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced it's 100% possible because my camera's on the ground and those mountains in the background are keeping, because this is the water line right here, and you get the mountains behind it. So the sun never actually hits the water line, and so it can't do it. So I'm trying to find some more, some unique ways to get around doing that. Fieldcraft. So talking about, you guys have already asked a couple things about fieldcraft. Fieldcraft to me is what you do in the field to be able to get the shot. And part of that is crawling on, lots of army crawling. I go out there, I'm in the mud and trying to crawl around and get it. Couple of other things. That second point is a big one too. And there's a lot of reasons not to get too close and disturb birds, but very specifically, I'll mention one to photography, which is really selfish. Images look better when birds are comfortable. I can tell when I look at a shot when a bird is stressed, or when I see a photo of one that's flying in the opposite direction because it got disturbed. Those aren't the images I want to take. If you want a bird that's coming at you, is at eye level, that's comfortable with you, you've got to be very sensitive to how they're responding to you. And there's no one right answer. I've been 5 feet from a bird that's comfortable. I've been 100 feet from a bird that disturbed it. There's no necessarily one right answer. Each situation you have to assess, and that's a lot about why I want to get out before I know I'm going to shoot. If I know I'm going to shoot sunrise, I'm going to be out there before sunrise. If I'm going to shoot sunset, I'm going to be out there an hour and a half before sunset. And that's why, is to get comfortable with them and they with me so that I'm not bothering them. The last thing I'll mention, I don't know if, how many of you guys bird a lot, but one thing that I learned birding is, or photography, is that I can't bird at the same time. A good birder is looking for species, looking for differentiating between picking out some of the ones that are harder to tell from each other, might be counting. When I am photographing birds, I am not counting. When you're down there and you're looking through the lens at one bird, I have no idea what's going on around me. So it's really hard to do traditional list birding at the same time you're trying to be serious about photography. So when I go out, I'm usually picking one or the other. Either I'm going out and I'm a bird for a while, I'm going to go out and do photography for a while. Got a few things up here that I just kind of flashed this up, or some of the species that we have more of coming through Vermont, and then some of the ones that we have, they come through. I think we get all these every single year, but they're in such small numbers that finding one of those a pretty good find. Because I've been birding for a while and taking a lot of photographs, and I have a lot of photographs of a lot of different birds, I tend to probably focus on one of these if they show up. So I give you an example of like the ruddy turnstone a minute ago. So when I saw that show up, I was drawn to it because I just don't see those as often.
Wow.
Not a shorebird, but something, the two things that you'll see somewhat frequently if you're paying attention are peregrine falcons and merlins.
Yeah.
They buzz beaches. They love the taste of shorebird, and because they congregate on beaches and there's no protection, you see them pretty frequently. And the way you see them is when you're sitting on the ground and you're about to have the shot you want, everybody takes off. And you're sitting, get up looking around. Where are you? So this is a peregrine falcon. Yeah.
They're the ones that are endangered.
Oh, I don't know if they are at this point in time. That's a good question.
They are not as endangered.
I think they're actually doing a little better.
They were
30 years ago.
removed from the endangered
Oh, but
species
they
list
were-
in Vermont, yeah.
So I don't know a ton about that, but I do know that they've gotten better. And I'll give you an example. Peregrine falcons are doing, I would say extremely well. They're doing fairly well in New York City. They sit up on the buildings and dive bomb pigeons and stuff like that. So wherever they like cliffs, they like high points. So they're starting to learn how to interact and be successful in urban areas to some degree. I see them. I see peregrine falcons like downtown in St. Albans, same thing. They sit up atop the trees and watch some of the birds down in the park and come get them. I don't know if you guys ever. This is another person. You guys ever heard of Kyle Tansley? He's a photographer from Burlington, does bird photography as well. That's him. He and I shoot together sometimes, and I'm laying in the water. You can see how he's laying. He's got a wetsuit on. He's got the camera out looking around, and the bird just kind of came out between us. So anyway. So what you can't see in this image, I'm in the water. And sometimes I'll get in water. I can't get into water that's more than about up to here, as my elbows have to be in it. And with two challenges, one, my elbows are going to be sinking into the mud or the sand or whatever it's in. So I keep having to adjust. And the second thing, and what was really hard with this shot, is there's waves. And so my legs are kind of starting to float and my whole body is trying to jiggle at the same time. I'm trying to get the shot off, which is not easy. Something else that I've played around with is trying to take images in different ways of some are harsher images as far as light's concerned. So this is well before, I shouldn't say well before sunset. It's starting to get low enough that it gets harsh to look straight across. Something that's really kind of tricky is trying to focus on a bird like this because the camera can't do it very well when it's looking into really harsh direct light. And the other thing that happens is that if I'm looking down the lens at a bird like this, and the sun catches me, I'll go blind for a second. I lose everything. So it's really hard to just be careful and protect your eyes at the same time, trying to lock focus on a bird while you're looking at the sun. Sorry, I skipped ahead for a second. I really like sunsets and sunrises. I really like golden hour. That's something that you probably hear about. Golden hour, you got to get out there first thing, you got to be out there last thing, and I do that. What I've come to appreciate equally as much, and I mentioned earlier the colors, This is probably taking about 20 minutes before sunrise. It's looking at what they call blue hour. If you guys haven't heard of it, it's the hour before sunrise. It's the hour after sunset. And realistically, blue hour and golden hour are rarely an hour long. I mean, you're doing well if you're a half hour with really good light. But it's something that I've really come to appreciate is sticking around for that. This is a Hudsonian godwit. We do get a handful of them. Really long bills, really cool birds to watch and feed. They will stick that entire thing all the way in. Their mouth, I mean, they go in all the way into the ground. And this is one where I knew there was one out there to check some eBird lists, and I saw them out there, and I got kind of excited. But when I got out there, wouldn't give me the time of day. I tried to approach a couple different times. He just kind of went off to the side and kept feeding. And I just was like, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. I went and shot off some other things. And while I was shooting something else, it's probably an hour later, this bird came back around. And so the sun set. I didn't have any shots of this thing in the daylight, but sunset, and it got comfortable and was feeding like crazy and ended up walking around pretty close to me. This is probably 5 minutes later. You can see the sun continues, the color continues to drop out of the sky and get more and more blues and less of the oranges and reds. Talk for a few minutes about bird behavior. Something that I was alluding to earlier is I've noticed a change in how I bird and how much I've stopped to appreciate the bird in front of me. It's not something I used to do when I was just walking around trying to identify something. And it's something that I don't even know I can do as well with binoculars now as I can with the camera. There's something about sitting in one place and watching either a bird or a group of birds or an area for a long period of time. And you mentioned Bridget Butler earlier. I think that's probably an overlap in theory and how we like to bird. It's kind of like slow birding and trying to appreciate the environment and the behaviors that happen as opposed to just seeing it as it comes and goes. And then the last piece on here, which I'll talk about as I go through, is the easy thing when I walk up is to get a profile shot. Is you see the bird, take a picture of the bird, and it's doing whatever it's doing. Once you start to watch for a while, you start to be able to predict their behavior a little bit more. You see how they're moving, which direction they're headed in. For shorebirds in particular, if they're working their way down a water line, I will go way ahead. I will pick a spot and lay down and just wait for them to come to me. If they do it on their terms, they're comfortable. It also allows me to see the behavior as it's coming rather than chasing it and chasing the bird while it's trying to feed. So this is a leaf sandpiper. I don't know what's picking up. You guys might know. But,
I love it.
won't argue with that.
That's a good shot.
So kind of hard to get, and you got to get a little lucky. You have to know that it's about to happen, and even then, you still have to be a little lucky to get wormholes. This is a black-bellied plover.
Oh,
This is out of breeding plumage. We're in the non-breeding plumage at this point. This is taken really late in the year. I think ice had just started forming around the edges of the lake, so I'm, it's probably whatever it is, 20 degrees. It's middle late in November, and I'm freezing. Getting
And
that.
that's a worm?
That is a worm.
About how far away from that bird would your friend?
10, 15 feet maybe.
Wow, that was, that's really cool.
So this one, I actually remember that. What's really cool about this too is for almost all of my photos, and I've taken a lot. Last year, I probably, I took 40,000. The year before, it's probably like 70 or 80,000 photos. And most of them were garbage, and I'm not showing those tonight. But what's really cool is that for a lot of these, I remember the specific moment. I remember that this bird was hanging out with a dunlin. It was only the two of them on that entire thing. This was taken up at Swantown Beach. And I remember the night that I went out there, and I ended up talking to a guy after the fact because he saw me out and chat for a while about birds. And so it's really cool that each one of these to me has a moment. I remember who I shot this with. I went out with somebody else when I took this photo. And we were laying there talking about different ways that we photograph birds. This is a semi-palmated plover. If you guys don't know, plover species have a tendency to hold still, run somewhere very quickly, try to feed, and then stand there again and watch for the next thing. And so there's some unique opportunities where they stand still. It's really easy to get profile shots. What's really hard is to know where they're going to run and when they're going to put their beak into the ground and get a worm. And sometimes you get the shot and sometimes you don't. And the D500, the technical question, shoots, if you got an XQD card in, an SD card in there, and I've got a battery pack, if I use that on there, I get like 11 shots in a second, which is kind of overkill. That's why I have 70,000 shots in there. But,
What's your shutter speed?
ooh, really good question. So a shot like this, I'm guessing, I have it, I could tell you, I'm gonna guess it's probably like 1/1000. General rule of thumb, if you haven't heard, is you wanna shoot 1 over the length of your lens. So if your lens is a 500 millimeter, 1 over 500 is probably the slowest you wanna shoot, because the length of it, you're more likely to introduce camera shake or camera blur, where you're moving and twitching just a hair and it starts to blur the image. I have really come to appreciate shooting a lot slower than that. And I'll show you an image later that I took at 1/6 of a second. I don't use a tripod, I just hold really still.
Even in the mud?
Especially in mud, actually, well, yeah. I'm kind of tripod, so when I'm done, you probably saw the picture, I have my elbows down, so I'm almost creating a tripod out of myself. So just another image of the semi-palmated. Here's one of the Hudsonian godwit. I mean, this is how they feed. So when they're in deeper water, and I don't know how deep this is, probably only like 2 or 3 inches, but yeah, there's like 11 of them out there at one time, all doing this, heads down in the mud, and the mud was below the water, so that's what they're doing. This is a Hudsonian godwit. This is the one I was showing earlier with the really, it's not this long, but it's a really long bill. I don't know what this guy's doing, but he just randomly started yelling. He just did. I was watching for about 10 minutes and just sitting there, and then he just started yelling out of nowhere and wouldn't stop. And then he did stop, and then he just walked away.
On one leg?
So this is a semi-palmated sandpiper chasing a semi-palmated plover chasing a bug. I'm joking. They don't actually eat bugs out of the air. This image cracks me up because it's almost as if this bird is trying to say, I did this, but that is not the size of what that bird could do. This is definitely a goose. This is on one of the mud flats, and I've unashamedly crawled through enough of this stuff to get to the birds. And sometimes watching them, I mean, sometimes their behavior is sitting there. They just sit there. They like to snooze. They'll close their eyes. A lot of times you'll see them on one leg if they're resting. They'll nod off. They'll twist around. And then this one was just a little bit lucky. I was down at this is not crop. I was sitting down there watching at the end of a boat launch. And they were both kind of sitting there. One of them just took off, and I just fired quick enough. And these are lesser yellowlegs, which I actually shoot quite frequently because they're fairly cooperative and we have a lot of them come through. So birds can't digest 100% of what they eat, and so they grow back up. So this is one we were sitting. This is in November. We're sitting in the middle of the lake for about an hour, about 45 minutes in. So this bird didn't move for 45 minutes. They're mid-migration. It's probably a juvenile. I'm not an expert on aging Hudsonian godwits, but I think it's a juvenile. So his first year, he stopped. He's tired. He's just trying to get some rest. And so that's one of the times you want to be careful because you don't want to push him off. You don't want to scare him because he's going to waste energy. He's trying to get ready to take the next leg. So we sat there for about 45 minutes watching the guy sleep. He woke up. He threw up, went back to sleep. About 15 minutes later, we scooted back out there. So,
Supposedly
I'd
they
seen-
take all the little remnants of the stuff they can't eat, butcher bones or something, and then it actually rolls up into a little ball, and then they'll spit it out. And moms will do that with bird nests, with all the little junk the birds, little babies are doing. And then carry it as a little sack and dump it somewhere outside. So I don't know whether that's a throw up or he's pushing out those little sacks.
it's what they call a pellet. Like an owl has a pellet. You guys are maybe most familiar with that. Shorebirds can do that too because they're eating stuff that has like shells and stuff.
Right.
And they can't, I don't fully understand, but I know they do it. So
Animals
I
do
think
it too.
this and this may have like pieces in it, whereas the rest is some of the, I don't know if it's some of the stomach juice or some of the bile or something that's coming up as well. So I'd seen this behavior, and what's interesting is there, you can almost imagine a person about to vomit. This kind of motion, you start to see it happen. And I saw it again with the lesser yellowlegs. This was, we'd been shooting for a while. It was one of these Vermont fall nights to where, you think you're going to get a brilliant sunset, then the clouds come out at the last minute and they cover it up before the sun. So you're out there and you're ready to go, and the sun goes away and it gets dark. And right when we thought we were done, my buddy got out. He started getting dressed, and I stayed out. And the sun peaked up just enough to put some color back in the sky. These birds were sitting there. I saw one of them start to vomit, so I ended up getting a shot of it. So
There it is.
that's the pellet coming out.
Oh, gross.
It's gross, but I just thought it was good. It's good to be able to capture.
Good capture.
So environment things started. I've changed a lot in the way I shoot different times. Part of it's out of boredom. You shoot like the same shot over and over, and okay, I've shot this bird up close. I have a million shots that look like that. What can I do differently? And so start thinking about what's a way to capture what's quintessential about a species and the environment that they're in. What shot can I take that says, yeah, that's definitely that bird. So starting to look at different ways to incorporate elements. So it's not just a clean environment anymore, but it's purposefully composed to where it's not messy, but it's also not blank. So trying to make shots that it's not just the bird and just mud everywhere or just green everywhere. So here's rocks, and you can see a nice little reflection of killdeer. Pretty common. This is actually one of the few birds that breed, one of the few shorebirds that breed in Vermont. This is the Dunlin. This is a better shot of their bill. They have a fairly unique bill. It's long and it starts to droop at the end. It's distinct enough to birders that when you see them in profile, even without any plumage, even without anything else, you can identify what it is. So this is a snipe. I've had extreme difficulty getting shots of snipe. The snipe I see, if you don't know, snipe will winnow, especially in the springtime, which is where they're sky high. You'll see them go across and they'll make a winnowing sound. Then when they come down to land, they'll usually land so far down in the grass you can't see them at all. So there's no way you can take a photo that shows anything about them. And then the only other two places that I've seen them, which personal preference is not to take images with man-made objects as much as possible, is either on a fence post or on a wire. And they look really strange to me, being a big shorebird, but they'll actually grasp a telephone wire and hang out there. So seeing this one was actually pretty cool to me. I went down to see, I think it was a spotted sandpiper, and this guy popped up and ended up kind of getting a lucky shot of it. Other thing is to incorporate some elements. I think it just gives more texture to an image, but here's two of the Dunlin sleeping. They would not pop up for any save my life, and they just sat like that. But just starting, this is all grass. This is water down there. There's a mud flat that they're on, and it's some of the grass. And you can see some of the sun coming off of the water itself. And I think that's probably some of the mountains in the background, far distance. So trying to incorporate a little bit more like that. Different probably take, but same kind of ideas, incorporating some of the grasses behind them. And all that does is kind of give texture to the image besides being able to see the bird, and obviously the sun blows it out there. This was taken in Vermont. I like this image because it looks like it was not taken in Vermont. It looks like a beach shot. This is on a mud flat. This is early in the year, so this is July, which is when shorebird migration just as getting started. This is probably like the 15th or so of July, one of the early ones. And because of that, this sanderling is still in breeding plumage. They have a lot more color to them. They end up turning really like grays and whites by the time we see more of them come in through August and September. So this one was coming down. I just crawled up on the beach. And, it was kind of cool even out there. They do get waves, and you do get these lapses, which is what sanderlings like. They're the ones, if you don't know, really frantic on. If you go to the coast and you're just walking down the beach, you'll see they're the ones that are running in and out of the waves every time. So they're doing some of that here. This is more of a minimalist image. I shot this. This is up at the north end of Lake Champlain as well, the lesser yellowlegs. There's no real color in the sky. It was cloudy, but it was bright. and just trying to embrace that instead of trying to force an image that doesn't exist. Last thing I'll talk about here are some things that are pretty a little bit more unique to the art side of this, as opposed to just the birding and kind of the wildlife aspect, are things that I've had to either learn or embrace to get better images. Times to photograph are, like I mentioned, golden hour, most people know. I've really come to appreciate blue hour. And then on cloudy days can actually be really good. You're not going to get the colors, but on cloudy days, you can shoot for an extended period of time. I've gotten to a point where if it's going to be no clouds in the sky and the sun comes up, about 10 minutes after the sun comes up, I stop being interested in shots unless I can get something kind of creative going. The light can get really harsh some days, and it depends on the humidity and a lot of other factors. And there's times we're talking about photographing that you have to put a lot into to get to that time of day, just to find out that the birds didn't show, the sun didn't show, or something else happened. You end up not getting it. That's part of it. Strike out a lot too. Trying to stay true to the scene. Something I've just had to learn is not trying to force an image that doesn't exist. I think a lot of people like brilliant colors, but sometimes the brilliant colors aren't there. So what can you do differently that still kind of shows the bird, shows the environment, shows something interesting, but isn't necessarily what you set out to get for that day? Obstructions. So I mentioned I crawl through. That's probably one of the harder things, is to get clean images. There's so much when you don't even realize how much like sticks are sticking out of the water by 2 inches when you're standing up. But once you get down, they're in the way everywhere. So trying to crawl around and find windows and lanes to shoot in can be really a challenge. I think, and I'll crawl through water, sand, and mud. The worst, I think, is Swantown Beach, if you guys are familiar. If you go off the boat launch, some of the nastiest mud. So about 2-3 inches into the water, you hit the mud, but your elbows are going to go down for another 12, 14 inches. And it's bad. Lots of not there. I haven't completely gotten stuck, but I've gotten sucked in when I was wearing muck boots. It's where you get to that point where your boot's not coming with you. That sort of thing. And the last thing I'll talk about, I'll show a couple examples, is just trying to experiment with something different. So give a couple examples of different takes on a similar situation, just to kind of play around. It's changing exposure settings to try to make an image look differently. So this one, I shot this a little bit darker. It emphasizes the shape of the bird, kind of gives you a little bit of a harsher feel. You can still feel the sunset coming through, as opposed to something like this, which is a little bit maybe softer. I let the light come in a little bit more. Very similar situation, but the image itself feels very different. And so trying to understand and see that through the lens at the time you're in the field, it can be a challenge. Playing around with some things. Those birds drooping, in and out of water, so just kind of do a tight shot. I thought it looked cool. This is a very high shutter speed. I have no idea how fast I shot it, but you have to get pretty quick to get droplets suspended in air. And you're able to do that in really harsh settings because there's a lot of light coming through, especially when you start shooting towards the sun. It's a lot easier to get a lot of light in the lens. So this is a couple different concepts in photography, like high key and low key. High key is where you essentially blow out the image. Everything's white except for the subject. This is the opposite. It's called low key. So where everything's really dark and except for maybe you'll see there's still remnants of some trees back here. It's standing on a tree right here. It's actually a piece of driftwood. This is one of the few images I took in the middle of the day. Things didn't work out in the morning, and I ended up not being able to bird until 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And in those situations, a lot of times I don't even take a camera because I'm not going to shoot. It's like I'll take the binoculars and enjoy the birding. I did, for whatever reason, saw this and really stepped it down. So I used exposure compensation on my camera a lot. So I'm shooting really negative to make it really dark, knowing that this bird's gonna really pop because they're so light compared to their surroundings. And so that was kind of just a different creative way to approach it.
What was he doing?
I think he's just ruffling his feathers.
Do you
he's
see
just,
that
yeah,
image
he's
through your lens, or is that something that often you're surprised at what you captured when you go back through them
Really good question. I'm not nearly surprised today, but the first time you capture an image like that, yes, you're like, because you don't know how you did it. You're like, you come back home, you're like, whoa, that's cool, but I don't know how to do it again. And so it's a lot of experience. You know, I mentioned earlier, I shot 70 or whatever, 80,000 images in a single year. I threw away 60, how many thousand of them, and then learned off the remainder, and a fraction of those I'm showing you. There's so many bad shots I took to learn, and there's probably easier ways to do some of that, which is like joining a community that teaches and try to understand. But a lot of it for me was just trial and error. To answer your question a little bit more specifically, sometimes I see it through the lens, and sometimes I know from experience how to set the settings to then be able to get the image back when I go back and look at my computer to get it. So it depends. This is another one that is probably a little bit in line with your question here, to where when you look at this, if you can imagine, I mean, the sun's still up, so it's still pretty bright. So it's filling your eyes and the camera a lot too. So you have to think about how to set the camera to get it together. I went out there for shorebirds and didn't find any. So ring-billed gull was hanging out. And I mentioned earlier, I would show you an image where I was trying to get creative a different way. I want to put the bird's head in the setting sun.
Mhm.
Instead, I'm putting the bird inside the reflection off the water. So it's kind of a different way to approach a similar image, since I can't get the sun low enough in Vermont. Something else I've played with, and even since I did this, I've played with black and white a little bit more, is trying to find images that have good contrast. The more contrast typically make a better black and white image. I used to probably play around with that more post-processing, as in I didn't intend to do that when I went out in the field. I've started a little bit more thinking about how to find a contrasty setup that may produce a better black and white image after the fact. That's still probably on the front end of trying to play around with that concept. This one's also not particularly sharp, but I've also started to embrace the fact that not having the sharpest image is okay if you like the feel of the image. And this is one of those mornings where the sun never came up. This is maybe 30 minutes after sunrise, but it's kind of a gloomy day. But there's kind of some steam coming off the water, and it looked kind of had a vibe to it that I thought was kind of cool. And I knew you kind of shoot this a little dark, you can get the bird to pop out because it's so bright. This is the dun one again. There's a droopy bill, and this is an image that I was really pleased with at the time, to get just like a really distinct profile. Like anybody that knows what a dun one looks like can look at that and know just, yeah, that's definitely a dun one. That bill shape is a giveaway. And then really playing around with the blue owl as well. There's a long time that I kind of blamed my equipment and saying, I don't think and it's not good for low light, but, and kind of using it as an excuse for not being able to get creative with what I had. And instead slowing down and trying to find other ways. We asked about the shutter speed earlier, and trying to slow things down and get better at holding still and shooting solid images to get it out. This is Sanderling. I just like the picture. This is a lesser yellowlegs. This is another one where the sun wasn't cooperating. I went out there to kind of get a sunset shot. 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it was before sunset, the clouds came in and they didn't leave. So I didn't see a sunset that day, but instead just trying to find areas around where the lesser yellowlegs were moving that I thought kind of gave a dreamy feel to it, and it kind of embraced that aspect of it.
Are they usually in a group or?
Both. I've seen them single. They definitely travel in groups. Well, here's another thing. I think when I first started doing bird photography, you see like big groups of birds, so you're like, oh, let me go get those because there's so many of them. I'll get an image of one. If you're trying to document a species, that's great. You can take a shot with 20 birds in it, and hopefully one of them's turned with the right profile, one of them is showing whatever band you need to identify it. If you're trying to get a good image of a bird, it's actually really hard to do a group setting. It's really hard because sometimes they'll spook each other, and so if one gets spooked, they all get spooked and they're gone. And the other thing is, even if they're calm and they're feeding, trying to compose a shot, you get one bird to do what you want it to do, but the background's filled with birds doing stuff you don't want them doing. So I've come to appreciate just trying to get one bird. But then on the reverse, I like the challenge of trying to make group shots work. So here's one, I'm not sure this works, but something a little different. Kind of pushing in my mind, the creative piece. Instead of walking up and seeing a bird out there and just putting them center frame, is trying to include what's basically dead space for most of this. What you don't know looking at this image, and I'll tell you, is the front end of something I'm gonna work on is underwater photography. And this is actually taken with an underwater protective lens cover. And so half of my lens is actually below water and the top is pointing out here. So you're actually looking at through the water just to kind of give it a different feel to it. Watch these birds for a while. This is also a shot. I used to always shoot at 500mm, which is my camera lens maxed out, which is as close as you can get with my lens. This is shot at like 200mm, so I'm backed up all the way and trying to include a little bit more of the surroundings, something that I've just kind of gotten into and want to do a little bit more. Yeah. Got a couple more images and I'll wrap up. So this is a semi-palmated plover. This is the beginning of an idea that I've far from perfected, which is to take longer exposures. Something I mentioned earlier about semi-palmated plovers is they're very predictable behavior. Even though you don't know where they're going, you know what they're going to do, which is they're going to hold still, they're going to run and stop again. And so my ideal image is to have a bird, a single exposure with a bird, he's left, stopped, and then he's in the image again. I've tried a couple different ways. This is more of a concept at the moment, but this is a single exposure. The bird was there and then he left. I took this, I think, at 1 second. So this is a really, really long exposure for bird photography. Another thing that I tried out is, I think this is the last two I've got. So this is one of a lesser yellow legs. I took this up at the very mouth of the Missisquoi, where it dumps into Lake Champlain. I don't really talk about what it takes, but it takes me a half hour to get to the launch. You got to get in a kayak. It's, you know, a paddle to get out there. Then you got to get out and get set up, and you do all that. And then I saw this bird. I've been hanging out for a while, so this is after sunset. The light that you see in the background, that big old orange ball, is actually a house light where, like next to Campbell's Bay is. It's where I launched like a mile and a quarter, whatever the distance is away. And just being able to get close enough to the bird that light, call it a bokeh ball in photography, is big enough that you kind of put the bird in. Now it's not very crisp. It's really grainy because it's shot really 20-30 minutes after sunset, but I really like the concept of it enough that I went back like 3 nights later and tried it again and crisped it up, and I was actually really happy with this. It's a lot cleaner, it's a lot better image, but it's the same concept. It's the exact same light. I think I took it probably 5 or 10 minutes earlier in the night, so it's not quite as dark and blue. But trying to just kind of play around with the urban setting without knowing that it's an urban setting, which is that man-made light in the background, and trying to just do something a little bit different. So
why are there 2 light circles in the previous image?
probably from the other light, because there's at the launch, there's a few houses, and I think just the way I was positioned, I was capturing that one. And then in the next image, I just shifted around just enough that the other one's probably off screen. Anyway, so that's what I had for this evening. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate the invite to call in to the program, for being able to come here and share everything with you. If you guys have questions, I'll answer them, but I just want to say thank you for inviting and letting me share with you.
Question about a different bird, because I don't know who to ask. Over in the Adirondacks, I hadn't seen one before, but it was a bird flying up in the air in the foothills of the Adirondacks, but it was a little bit like a what do you call it? A bird that eats dead animals.
Vulture?
It was smaller than a vulture, but the thing that caught my eye was a bright yellow bill, like the color of a Sunoco sign yellow. that was the most prominent thing about this bird, and I had no idea what it might be.
What color was the bird?
Because of the bill, it was kind of, a mix, it wasn't an outstanding color, probably, maybe whites and blacks and browns, I guess.
I'll have to give it some thought. I don't know right off the top of my
But I've
head.
never seen a bill like that. It was so pronounced,
Very yellow. I'll
yeah.
have to give that some thought. Yes.
Given that you photographed shorebirds so much, I'm surprised that we didn't see any great blue heron
Yeah.
in your repertoire. Is there a reason for that?
No, there's not a reason
You
for
must
that.
see a lot of them.
I do.
Don't like photograph them.
I think that's a good question. Yeah, why didn't I include one? I definitely have a lot of photographs of great blue heron.
You just,
I don't tend to probably seek them out. They're super common and I have shot them a lot. I think part of that's also shaped by trying to find creative ways to shoot them. So unless I'm seeing something in the field that interests me, I'm probably not gonna go follow up with one.
Do you ever do kingfishers?
Kingfishers are really hard.
I know, but they really go, they go diving into the
Yeah.
water.
Yeah, they're really hard.
Oh,
They're notoriously hard.
It's
So,
kind
so
of neat to watch.
I've joined some like social media communities of bird photographers. And I think they will all agree kingfishers are hard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're really sensitive to people, so it's really hard to
Oh,
get
they
close to them.
Because they don't like to keep watching.
No. And trying to predict where and when they're gonna dive is also really hard.
What about the osprey? Because they have those nests all on. I've seen
Yeah.
one. Do you ever do those?
So osprey, I got maybe a little spoiled. So I was living for a little bit in North Carolina and there's a lake with a dam. And the dam had, at any given time, like a dozen bald eagles and an osprey coming through there.
Where
Because
was
there's
it?
such, as in Chapel Hill.
Oh, North Carolina.
Yeah, there's such a concentration of fish coming off that dam that you could just sit there and wait for the birds to come. In Vermont, and it just because I have other things that I've wanted to go spend time with instead. It's hard to find, you don't know where the osprey's gonna go get the fish. It could be anywhere on that lake. And so you can stand on shore, you can see one come and they'll circle around and they're gone. So it's really hard to predict where they're
Like
gonna feed.
sandbar, they have a whole bunch, there's a lot of them.
The nest,
Because they have nests on them.
right.
A lot of it.
So I try to get creative and take a shot. So what I ended up doing with an osprey nest one time is, I'm trying to explain because I don't think I pulled it up fast enough, is get the silhouette of the bird on the nest and then hide it using trees and then put it against the sun. So what you see is a bunch of like trees and then you just see the bird silhouetted. So trying to do something creative like that. But other than that, I haven't really tried to do a whole lot with osprey.
Well, thank you very much. Oops, one more question from
Yes.
Carol.
I don't have your paper over there, so maybe that has an email or website.
I didn't even think to put it on here. I probably should have done that.
Well, what I wanted to do is I took a couple of shots so people would know who you were. And I like to post them on Facebook. And I just photographed also the copy of the list of birds. But I thought it would be nice if you had a website or something so that I could post some of these photographs of yours, because they're very sweet. Or I don't know whether sweet's not the right word. They're just great. They're fun to watch. And
That's probably the best place. That's my name on Instagram. I only, if you follow me, I only post wildlife. I don't do anything personal life on there. It's just wildlife. If any of you are involved with there's a couple different Facebook groups. There's like Vermont Birding or Vermont Birding Plus. I when I'm shooting, I post frequently. Taking a little bit of hiatus in the last few months, having a kid that'll do that to you.
and you
But,
didn't show us any photos of your.
Where will his first birding trip be?
That's a good question. I think my first birding trip for my daughter was, she couldn't have been more than like
Oh, so this
a
is
month
your second
old.
one.
Yeah. So my daughter's getting just old enough she can hike for a little bit. And I was talking about my wife's like, if you want to go birding this summer, you get her to go with you. So, that's probably what, I took her out in the kayak a few times. I don't think she's got the stamina to do it so I'll go shoot moons in the summer. It's getting up really early and trying to go shoot something like that before I come home and then wife and kid wake up.
Are you selling any of your prints?
If you're interested, contact me. I don't sell a lot.
I don't do a lot of Instagram. Do you have any other way to reach you?
Facebook, you can just search for my name. Probably be the easy way. I can put my email, I could say, I'll give that to you after that if you're interested.
So what are you doing with the photographs? That's all.
Just have it.
So
Having fun.
Have you printed them and put some up at your house?
Very, very few. In fact, the first couple of years I was shooting seriously, I didn't do it at all. And I printed some to be able to hang in a studio, which I did for a few months. I didn't sell very much. My interest is not in
Prints.
Yeah, it's not in making a business out of it. I enjoy being in the field. If there's anything that I'm gonna do, I'd rather take people out and do workshops than I would try to sell prints, to be honest with you. So I don't have much in my house. I got a picture like a little fox and I think 1 or 2 birds. That's about it.
But is there a core group that you tag with that I know you do a lot of this yourself, but you run into other birders or?
I do.
photographers?
Yeah, good question. So I know a lot of birders in Vermont, most of which I haven't personally met. You kind of create, and a lot of people comment, you start to talk to people online a lot. So I'm really appreciative, especially during COVID and all, to have the kind of social aspect of social media. As for shooting specifically, the person I've shot with the most is Kyle Tansley. Hopefully going out on Saturday to shoot with him. There's a couple of people that I've shot with. I don't know if you guys would know Claire Payne, if that name rings a bell. Jess Sweeney, who's also up in the Georgia area. So a few other people that I've shot with, and then a lot of birding friends, people that I shoot with.
It's a guy named Mark Hughes who lives in South Hero, and it's not so much birds, but he's really into experimenting with photography. I like to kind of keep up with him to
Cool,
get different ideas.
cool. Thank you. Art Hughes?
Hughes, HUS.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Is there any way your Zoom presentation can be available for people who come to Zoom? It's fantastic.
I can make that happen. I'll defer to you guys on the best way to make that
We
happen.
did record this, so,
But we hadn't, I don't think we wanted to confirm it with you
Yeah.
as well, so.
You got it.
okay.
Oh, yeah, that would be good, because then we can put posts up, we can show your work and just give you a little more coverage if you want.
Absolutely. That'd be great. Thank you.
Can we announce the Sibley talk tomorrow?
Certainly.
David Sibley, who has written,
Oh, that book about what's it
Yeah.
like to be a bird?
I don't know what the titles are, but he's known as his books are becoming the world standard for.
They are.
birding. But he's going to be lecturing at Plattsburgh State tomorrow night at 7 p.m. in Yoakum 200, and there'll be a reception following it, and you can buy books or they'll sign books that you have.
That's pretty
But
cool.
his talk is going to be on the psychology of birding. Like when Bruce asked about the bird with the yellow bill, there's some things that we see and other things that might not even notice. So that's what he's gonna be talking about.
Where does he live, I wonder?
Massachusetts someplace, I've forgotten where. Do you know?
You want his book called What It's Like to Be a Bird.
Oh, good.
He's painted a bird, he's painted that bird on the left side. On the right side, he has 3 short paragraphs telling about the individual bird and so the chickadee is the social one. So any bird who's migrating will find the chickadee, and the chickadee will include them in their flock and tell them where they should go to eat and safe places to stay.
I have a friend that does that.
So that's-
Start calling them.
I've actually witnessed that a lot.
Have
And there's
you?
different
Did you-
things. So when you're trying to find owls, you have to go find blue jays.
Yeah.
Because blue jays will kind of mob them and stuff, and they'll tell you right crows, depending on where you're at, what kind of environment you're in. But like little tricks about that, like you go find one bird or go find something else. Yeah, chickadees are really, anytime I see chickadees come through, I usually stop. Not just chickadees are really cute, but besides that, because I know something else might be mixed in with it. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
and then he also talks about, there's apparently all the individual feathers on the body, there's a special feather with them so that they always know which feather has the fly on it, which feather is malformed, which feather needs to be cleaned.
That's pretty cool.
So Eileen, thank you for shouting that out for Cindy. That's great to know.
Yeah, I hope I see a bunch of you there. I hope you can make it.
So Ashley, thank you again very much for coming out. So really appreciate it. Everybody, please watch the boards. And as always, the basic program is really careful when imagery is what's the word? Protected, copyright protected. So we try to do that with all artists. Just be careful, that's first. So thank you.
And thank you for doing the food
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I wanted to write that information down.